About 8 months ago, I moved into a two-story Victorian home just outside of Pittsburgh. It was old, like 1880s old, but the price was too good to pass up. I'm a single mom with a 1-year-old daughter, Lily. I work remotely, so the idea of having a little house with character, a backyard, and space for a nursery felt like a dream. But I'd learned quickly. This house didn't feel like a dream once it got dark. It started with little things. The first night we spent in the house, I woke up to Lily crying. Not unusual, she still wakes up once or twice a night. But when I got to her room, she was just sitting up in the crib, wide-eyed. Not crying anymore, just staring. She was looking at the far corner of the room. Nothing was there. I picked her up, rocked her, got her back to sleep. Didn't think much of it, but then it kept happening. Not every night, but often enough that I started keeping track. Always at 3:17 a.m., that exact time, and always her eyes locked on the same corner. The room itself was kind of strange. The rest of the house had updated outlets and newer windows. But the nursery, what had clearly once been a child's room before, still had the original wooden floorboards, warped in places. One of them near the crib creaked every time I stepped on it. Eventually I pulled back the rug to check it out. The board was loose. When I pressed on it, the edge popped up slightly. Curious, I pried it up. Underneath wasn't insulation or beams. There was a hatch, a square of wood with an iron ring in the center. No hinges, no markings, just flush with the surrounding frame. I didn't open it right away. Something about it made my stomach knot, so I put the rug back and tried to forget it. But after that, things got worse. About a week later, I woke up to the sound of Lily's baby monitor clicking on. It makes this static sound when it activates. Then I heard it, a voice, whispering, just a few words. Not Lily, not me. It said, "She's crying again." I bolted up and ran into the nursery. Lily was sitting in the crib, tears running down her face, but not making a sound, just staring again into that corner. I unplugged the monitor the next day, tried to tell myself it was interference, a neighbor's baby monitor maybe, but I couldn't shake it. So the next night, I set up a camera in her room, not a baby monitor, a real one, motion activated, night vision. I checked the footage the following morning. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the camera triggered. For about 10 seconds there was nothing, just Lily sitting up in her crib. Then, without warning, the rocking chair in the corner began to sway, back and forth, slow and steady. There was no draft, the windows were shut, the door was closed, but the chair rocked on its own. And then, this part still makes my skin crawl, Lily turned to face the camera, wide-eyed, and smiled. That afternoon, I ripped the rug up again and opened the hatch. It led to a small square chamber, maybe 6 feet deep, dirt floor, wooden walls, like a root cellar, but directly under the nursery. No stairs, just a drop. I lowered my phone in with the flashlight on and took a few pictures. What I saw still haunts me. A rocking horse, a broken rattle, a child's shoe, and carved into the far wall in jagged letters, "Don't let her cry." I showed the pictures to a friend who does local historical research. She got really quiet and asked for my address. An hour later, she called me back. Apparently, back in 1904, the house belonged to a man named Abram Greeley. His daughter died at 2 years old. According to archived records, she had a condition that caused uncontrollable crying fits. There were reports of neighbors hearing her scream late into the night. And one night, the crying stopped. Abram claimed she passed away in her sleep, but he was never seen in town again after her burial. And no official cause of death was ever confirmed. The house changed owners a dozen times in the next century, but the nursery remained untouched until I moved in. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 3:17, I sat outside Lily's room with a flashlight. Nothing happened for the first few minutes. Then I heard the chair creak, softly, like someone had just sat in it. I cracked the door open. The hatch was open, and Lily was standing up in her crib, arms outstretched toward the hole in the floor, like she wanted to go down there. I didn't wait another day. We left that morning and never came back. I broke our lease, paid the penalty, didn't care. I'd rather be broke than bury my daughter in the same spot that little girl was buried in over a century ago. I still don't know what was in that room, whether it was a ghost, a curse, some kind of leftover pain that never went away. All I know is something was under the nursery floorboards, and it didn't want to be forgotten. About a year ago, my wife and I inherited a cabin in northern Minnesota. It belonged to her great uncle, someone she barely remembered from childhood. He passed away under what the lawyer called isolated circumstances, which I guess is a formal way of saying he died alone and wasn't found for weeks. Still, the property was ours now. And honestly, it looked like a win. Private, lakeside, quiet. The cabin had clearly been neglected, but it was structurally sound. We figured we'd clean it up, rent it out, maybe even use it ourselves on weekends. But there was one thing that didn't sit right. When we looked at the blueprints, originals from the county, the cabin was listed as a one-bedroom with an attic and a root cellar. But when we walked through it, something felt off. The dimensions didn't line up. The hallway between the kitchen and bedroom was longer than it should have been, by several feet. I didn't think much of it at first. Old buildings have weird measurements all the time. But I kept coming back to that hallway. Why was there empty space in the walls? One weekend, we decided to pull out the old kitchen cabinets and update the plumbing. That was the moment everything changed. I was tearing out the back panel of a lower cabinet when I noticed something strange behind it. A vertical seam in the wall. I tapped on it. Hollow. The wall, where there should have been solid foundation, echoed back at me. I called my wife over. We compared it to the blueprint again. Sure enough, the blueprints showed nothing in that space. Just a solid support wall. But whatever was behind it wasn't solid. I ran to the shed, grabbed a crowbar, and started peeling back the paneling. Behind the wall was another wall, much older. Wooden planks, gray and dry with age. I found a latch at about waist height, rusty, corroded, but still functional. When I pulled it, a hidden door creaked open. We both just stared. Behind the door was a narrow corridor, no more than 3 feet wide, lit by a single dangling bulb. Dust hung thick in the air like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. We stepped inside. The air was cold, much colder than the rest of the cabin. The floor creaked under every step, and the walls were covered in yellowed wallpaper that peeled at the edges. At the end of the hallway was a small room. It looked like a child's bedroom. There was a twin bed against the wall, a wooden desk with a lamp, and an old rocking chair facing the corner. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust, but the layout looked preserved, like someone just walked out and never came back. I flipped the light switch. To my surprise, it worked. A dim ceiling bulb flickered to life. That's when my wife noticed the calendar. It was pinned to the wall above the desk, hand-drawn with scribbled notes and doodles. The date frozen at the top, November 1997. Every square was crossed off except for the last one. November 28th, a Friday, the day her great-uncle was last seen alive. We didn't say anything for a few seconds. Just stood there, staring at that date. The last day anyone had spoken to him. I went over to the desk and opened one of the drawers. Inside were crayon drawings, dozens of them. All of the same thing, a little figure, drawn over and over again. Sometimes outside a window, sometimes under a bed, sometimes standing in a corner with glowing red eyes. Some of the drawings were signed M. I asked my wife if she knew anyone in her family with a name starting with M. She shook her head. Then she pointed at the back wall. Scratched into the plaster, barely visible through the dust, was a message. Don't let him out. We left the room and didn't go back in that night. We were both too shaken up to talk much. We locked the hidden door, put the cabinets back in place, and tried to act like it never happened. But things got worse. That night, we heard footsteps in the hallway, soft, slow, deliberate. But when I got up to check, no one was there. Our phones glitched. The lights in the hallway flickered every time we walked past. The worst part came 2 nights later. I woke up at 3:12 a.m., cold. The cabin was silent until I heard a soft creaking from the kitchen. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the bedroom. The cabinet we'd reattached was wide open. The wall panel, hanging loose, the hidden door was ajar, and at the end of the narrow hallway, in the dim glow of that same flickering bulb, the rocking chair was moving. Slowly, back and forth, no wind, no air circulation, just moving. I stepped back into the bedroom and locked the door. We left the cabin that morning. We tried to report what we'd found, but the county office said the blueprint must have been a mistake. They had no record of renovations, no permits, nothing. A month later, the cabin was vandalized, windows smashed, interior trashed. We took it as a sign. We sold it for land value to some investor who didn't ask a lot of questions. I don't know what the purpose of that room was or who M was, but I think her great uncle was trying to keep something inside that room, and I think by opening it, we let it out. I was renting a small house with 2 other guys while attending college in Michigan. It was one of those older homes that look normal enough during the day, but take on a weird energy at night. The kind that creaks even when no one's moving. You get the idea. We found the place on Craigslist. 3 bedrooms, a basement, cheap rent. The landlord was this older guy named Harold, friendly enough, but kinda off. He had 2 rules. Don't block the vents in the basement. And never, under any circumstances, touch the furnace. It was some giant metal thing from the 1950s. Looked like it belonged in a museum. It wheezed, clicked, and made this deep metallic thumping sound when it turned on. Harold said it was delicate, and if we broke it, we'd be paying for it. Fine, we stayed away. The first weird thing happened about a week after moving in. I came home late from a night class, and as I was passing the basement door, I heard something. Not the furnace kicking on. It was whispering. It was faint, so faint that I thought maybe I imagined it, but it didn't sound mechanical. It sounded human. I opened the basement door and flipped on the light. The whispering stopped. I walked halfway down the stairs and listened. Nothing. I went back up and wrote it off as being tired. Maybe one of my roommates left the TV on. But then it kept happening. A few nights a week, always late, always when no one else was around. It wasn't always whispering either. Sometimes it sounded like movement. A soft dragging sound, like something crawling across concrete. About 2 weeks later, I was doing laundry down there. The washer and dryer were in the far corner, behind the furnace. I set my basket down, walked around that massive machine, and instantly felt colder. Like, noticeably colder, just a few steps away from the furnace. I noticed something else too. On the concrete wall directly behind it, the paint looked different, peeling in just one rectangular section, like maybe something had been removed or covered up. Out of curiosity, I took a flashlight and looked down behind the furnace. That's when I saw it, a narrow gap in the wall, not a hole, a seam. Like there was a panel built into the wall that had been painted over. I stared at it for a long time, and I swear, just for a second, I thought I saw movement through the gap, like someone slowly pulling their hand back into the darkness. That night, I told my roommates. They thought I was joking. One of them, Dylan, even said, "Bro, if you're trying to get out of doing your laundry, just say that." No one believed me. So a couple nights later, I decided I was going to prove it. I waited until everyone else was asleep, grabbed a screwdriver, a flashlight, and headed down. The furnace clanged as I walked past it like it was warning me. I crouched down and pressed on the wall panel. It shifted slightly. With a little force, I wedged the screwdriver into the seam and pried it loose. The concrete gave way to a hollow echo. Behind it was a dark, narrow crawl space. It was no more than 3 feet high, and it extended maybe 10 feet back. The walls were dirt. I aimed the flashlight inside and immediately wished I hadn't. Inside were stacks of boxes, old ones, water-damaged, moldy, and covered in dust. Some had shredded insulation spilling out. Others had holes, rat holes probably. I should have stopped, but I crawled in. The air was damp and smelled like mildew and copper. The first box I opened was filled with books and old newspapers. The second was just empty picture frames. But the third, it was full of Polaroids. I flipped through them under the beam of my flashlight. They were all photos of people. Some were normal, birthday parties, people smiling at the camera, but others not so much. One was a man sleeping in bed. Another was a woman brushing her teeth, like someone had taken the photo from just outside the bathroom door. And then halfway through the stack, I froze, because one of the photos was of me, asleep, in my room. My face turned toward the wall, blankets bunched around me exactly how I slept. I dropped the photo. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear. I scrambled backward out of the crawl space, kicking up dust. But before I could close it back up, I heard a sound from deep inside the crawl space, scraping, like nails dragging slowly against the dirt, then a whisper, a single word, barely audible over the hum of the furnace, "Stay." I slammed the panel shut and ran up the stairs, locked the basement door. Sat in my room with a knife in my lap until the sun came up. When I finally worked up the nerve to tell Harold about it, he just stared at me. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You opened it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said, "That room was sealed for a reason." Then he left. No explanation, nothing. A week later, the house was listed as no longer available. My roommates and I were given 30 days to vacate. No warning, no discussion. We moved out in 2 weeks. I didn't go back into the basement once. But the night before we left, I heard the furnace click on one last time, followed by a whisper from behind the door, "See you soon." Not everything hidden stays buried, and some doors were sealed for a reason. If you've ever found something in your home that shouldn't be there, you're not alone. Thanks for watching. If this video creeped you out, let me know by hitting that like button and leaving a comment. I read every single one. Subscribe for more true horror every week, and as always, sleep tight.